Casual Magic has been sponsored by Quiver, maker of the Quiver and Bolt deck cases and other fine deck holding accessories. Use the code CASUAL on their website for 10% off your order. We're also sponsored by Architect, the premier site for hosting your decks on the internet. I love them and they love me, and it seems like a good reason for you to use them. You can also support Casual Magic directly by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/ShivamB. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we talk about the fun side of Magic the Gathering. My name is Shivam, and Casual Magic is brought to you by Architect and Quiver and by my patrons at patreon.com/ShivamB. I was told I need to say that more often so that you guys actually go and subscribe to my Patreon so that I can keep doing this. It turns out it works. When you mention something exists, people realize that it exists. Look, I've been doing this show for like 4 years. I'm only just now learning how to be a content creator. Today, I'm very excited because I have a guest that I've actually been trying to get since I literally created the show. I have Ryan Overturf joining me. He's I guess you're now these days an LGS owner.
I'm part owner of Lodestone Coffee and Games. I still write about Magic. But, I think you were about to say commentator, but that hasn't been true for a few years now.
Well, yeah, but the reason I know who you are is because for a decade or something, when I would be like, doing my chores on the weekends or just living my life, I would have the SCG cons and not cons, I guess they were just like opens on in my MP3 player or in my phone, just playing in the background while I'm mowing the lawn. So I basically listened to you for hundreds and hundreds of hours telling me about weird either standard or legacy matches or something crap. And it's just wow, man, I just really, really you have a very similar capacity as Patrick Sullivan does, which is a very dry and ultimately entertaining delivery of Magic cards, which is hard to do. It is really hard to commentate on Magic cards, and you stuck out of my memory for many years as just somebody I really enjoyed listening to. So I was like, wow, I would love to have you come on. But the thing is, after you left SCG, you basically started doing talking about cubes and stuff all the time. And as regular listeners know, cubing is secretly my favorite way to play Magic. But so I wanted to have you on to talk about cube and finally, for God's sakes, explain what the hell a Twobert is.
Yeah, the concept is simple enough, but the name is stupid enough that it sounds harder to approach than it is. But no, that's all very flattering. I really appreciate that, and I'm really happy to be here talking about Magic. And we've been on kind of that similar casual content side of things for a few years now, so I'm more on your beat now, so it's very cool to be sitting here talking to you about Magic.
I mean, these days it feels like my beat is just the only beat left, right?
Yeah, no kidding. I did play a tournament for the first time in 4 years a couple weeks ago. It was weird, but kind of good in a weird way.
It was funny. I was talking to Brian Kibler, who had come back to Pro Tours for the first time in forever, and is now Mr. Famous Commander, king of the casual type of nonsense. And I'm like, is it weird to you to be sitting down and having tournament play? And he's like, yeah, well, the second I sat down and they gave me a stack of 15 cards in front of me, I immediately remembered how to ride a bicycle. I'm like, I guess if you did this for decades, then this is just an old muscle. But for me, every time I look at the way they draft in a tournament, I'm like, I can't. I don't get to look at the cards. Are you kidding? What do you? That's not fair. You want me to remember this crap?
I sat down for my first match, and it was a tournament run on MTG Melee, and I had never played a paper tournament run on Melee before. And I sat down and I asked my opponent, I said, I've only ever played Melee online, and I've only ever played open deck list tournaments. I don't see your deck list on the app. Am I supposed to? And they're like, no, it's actually a closed deck list tournament. I'm like, okay, thank you. I'm going to choose to trust you on that.
Oh man, yeah, it's wild because these past 2 or 3 years have been post real lockdown. It feels like everybody's relearning how to play paper Magic, and it's wild. I'm very glad that we skipped over Kaldheim and mutate, Ikoria, and foretelling and mutating and all this crap. It's oh god, there's no way. The plot is hard enough. Trying to remember your mutate stack in paper was just
You could easily stump me if you had some mutate trivia questions. I'll say that much.
God, oh my God! I'm just imagining how much miserable it must have been if they were trying to commentate mutate tournaments. Can you imagine trying to remember all of the effects any given? And Ikoria is when they started adding all the stupid, weird alt arts, and so you have no
Mhm.
idea what 30 cards are in that stack.
Yeah, that set jumped out, and it still does when I think back on like when did we jump the shark on booster fun? Because I remember I really like there's like this comic book style art in
Yeah,
Ikoria. I have
I
like the
like it a lot.
Narset, and it's really cool, right? And like the Godzilla cards, I was on board for the Godzilla cards, but then there was also just like more stuff. And I
Yeah.
was like, I don't think we need like a third good thing. And there's also like a new good dual land. It's like, how hard do we really need to work on selling one set? You
Well,
know,
I
back
mean,
in my day, you were lucky to get a good land. You were lucky to get something that looked cool. And if you got them both in the same set, like, whoa, the stars really aligned.
back in my day, we had Journey into Nyx, and we didn't like it.
Yeah, some sets just with nothing for anyone.
Nothing for nobody. Um, it's funny though. Journey at least had a lot of great cards for my commander decks. But that being notwithstanding, so how did you find Magic?
Yeah, so I started playing in 2003. Some friends in high school turned me onto it. Actually, this is one of my shameful gamer history secrets. I started with Yu-Gi-Oh, and then I turned on to Magic. I collected but never played Pokemon when I was even younger than that. But in high school, I started playing Magic around when Legions was the new set.
Mm, new players, man! I swear to God, all these youth that I'm talking to these days, like it's wild to me as a graybeard who's literally like. Sometimes I sit there, it's like, oh yeah, man, I started playing so long ago. Oh yeah, really? When did you start? Original Theros.
A friend of
Okay.
mine has been really kind of getting back into the local RCQ scene, and he kind of has like a team going, and it's got a lot of the local Zoomers on it. And our friend Pat McGregor, who's in his 40s, showed up, and it was quickly established that he had a Grand Prix top eight that was before some of the players on his team were born.
I mean, I've had people on this show who are literally younger than the draft lands that I use to for my when I go to like pre-releases or whatever.
I am at least a couple years older than Magic, so nobody can say that on me. But I didn't start until I was a teenager.
Cool. So, did you aim for like pro play or something? Because I'm trying to figure out how you got to the position of being a commentator. Because I know that you don't live anywhere near SCG.
No, no, it's a really long and kind of goofy story, and I think that when like a lot of people ask like how does a person get into a commentary, they expect like a
Accidents.
really clear through line, and you're not going to find that here. I've always been like kind of a competitive person, and the competitive aspect of Magic always appealed to me. Like I always wanted to beat my friends, but I didn't
Mm.
really start playing any actual tournaments until college. So I've been playing for like 4 or 5 years before I ever played a PTQ. And then a friend of mine in college qualified. He like won one of the PTQs we drove to, and after that, the fire was like really lit for me. He actually top 32'd my friend Jens Eriksson. He's like one of the better Magic players you've never heard of. He actually won the Netrunner World Championship some years ago. He has a Netrunner card with his face on it, if you know the game
I
Netrunner.
know what Netrunner is. Yeah,
Yeah, I can't think of what the card's called,
that's cool. I
but his
mean,
face is on it, which is
it,
awesome.
that's one of those things where it's like it doesn't matter what the game is. Being able to hold up a thing and say like, "Look," is always going to be cool.
Totally. But yeah, then I was pretty hooked on competitive Magic, and there's certainly highs and lows. Like my first pro tour, I like played all of the rounds, but lost my last round to like not cash. Like went for playing from something meaningful to not cashing, and kind of like struggled with. I needed to play way less Magic or way more Magic. Like this is the
Mm.
wrong amount of competitive Magic to be playing.
That is such a. I feel like a lot of people don't really understand that they're walking the line of misery, basically, by being like, either look, you either got to be dedicated and go to the thing you want to do, or just chill. But if
Hmm.
you're going to live at this threshold of just not of being at the cusp and never getting anywhere, you're going to be the most miserable person in the world.
Hmm.
It's such a. But nobody actually sits there and thinks about that. They're just like you got to commit or you got to stop.
Yeah,
Like,
well, I think about that a lot. So we could certainly talk about walking that line because that actually has a lot to do with how I got into commentary.
do
That pro
tell.
tour, I was on the same team as Matthias Hunt, who
Oh,
was
you went to
the
the pro tour?
my first pro tour in 2011, I think it was. Was
Wow.
in it was sick. It was in Nagoya, and this is back when they did travel awards. So like
Oh, that's so
I got to
cool.
fly to Japan, which I was broke, man. So like this is outside of my wildest dreams. But even still, like if you have no money and you win no money, flying halfway across the world is like pretty irresponsible to do, even
It
on somebody else's
sure
dime
is.
over the ticket, you know?
Yeah, you get there and you're like, where am I going to sleep?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I like this wasn't like the first time I met Matthias, but it was like one of the trips I had taken with him, and it was actually years later. It was 2015, I believe, when I started doing commentary, and at that point, like in 2011, in the 2010s, like early 2010s or like the late aughts, I was really watching all the tournaments and thinking
Mm.
like, I would be great at commentary. I'm so entertaining. I'm so smart. I would be so good at this. And then, I had a number of years of walking that line of like, am I playing Magic too much, too little? What am I even doing with my life? And
Yeah.
I was really ready to like buckle down. Like 2015 is also when my business partners, Mike Hawthorne and Forrest Ryan, we were really like getting into the vending game, and the company that would become Lodestone, we were really doing a lot of the heavy lifting on that. And so I was like ready to hang it up. I was like, all right, competitive Magic, whatever, maybe it's for me, maybe it's not. And that's when Matthias just called me super out of the blue and was like, I know you used to be like interested in commentary. Are you still interested? And my first thought was like, no, but
I mean, are you offering?
right, exactly. I was like, all right, yeah. I mean, I can't imagine I'm getting another call like this in my life. So I gave it a shot, and yeah, have a lot of really good memories from picking up that gig.
You mentioned something just in passing that I want to kind of poke into a little. Business partners, like, so how did you? What did that about? Like, were you running this store kind of simultaneously with doing the commentaries track,
Yeah,
or this kind
so
of idea?
we were at the time, our company was called Twin Cities Games, and we were
Mm,
just vending. We were going to like the local IQs. There weren't PTQs at this time. This might have been like overlapping slightly with the PPTQ era
mm,
and that sort of thing, and doing a lot of pre-releases. And we were building our inventory doing that, and that's where we were really starting to seriously consider starting an LGS. It's going to be 8 years that we've been open in November. So we go
nice.
back, so that's like 2016. So really heavy overlap with when I started commentary and when we really got into brick and mortar.
Cool. That's why. I mean, so by vending, you mean basically like going to stores with like the long boxes, setting up the things, and buying and selling cards from folks. Uh, like, how did you get into that? Were you just trying to fund
Uh,
your events?
I've always been very aware of the price of a Magic card, mostly because in high school it was difficult to convince my dad that what I was doing was worth the time and the money that goes into it. Like
That's the truth.
the idea of a card costing $10 made him angry. And I'm sure that's true for some of your listeners too.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Some cards, there's some commons and uncommon that definitely should not cost $10.
But then for me, like they came with that relationship, I had to justify how it was worth something. So like both knowing the value of a Magic card and how to stretch the value of Magic
Mm.
cards that I own became like fundamental to my approach to the game. And I've never been the kind to like own a ton of decks and like buy. I've been the type to like, all right, I own these cards. I want to play this deck. How do I turn these cards into that deck? And that's always been my approach, which is like really naturally translates the skills required to buy and sell at a
I'm
vending
feeling very
table.
judged here right now.
If anything, I'm envious of people with that kind of purchasing power.
It's not even purchasing power. It's just more like laziness and inability to go and want to actually like, and it's more of like, I don't want to part with my cards. And it's like, dude, you don't even play this color. You don't even like this archetype. You were never playing a spells matters deck. You're not a legacy grinder. Sell these goddamn storm cards or like this underworld. I'm like, yeah, but maybe someday. Like, I don't know. Like, Drew Levin came over to my house once and he like basically sat and spent like 3 hours just forcing me to throw out all like thousands of commons and uncommon stuff. He's like, look, these things cost $0.25. Shut up. You don't need this. And I'm
if
like,
you need them, you can buy them again.
Right. And then, of course, like immediately afterwards, I'm trying to build a deck and I'm like, where the hell is this one card I need? Oh, I gave it away. Oh, God damn it.
I actually recently, in my 30s, developed a real appreciation for sentimentality. So I think about a lot of stuff that I used to own that I wish I still owned. Like,
right.
I have a couple odd stamped cards from my early days, like grinding GPs and Pro Tours, but the only like draft deck from a Pro Tour I have still together with like Pro Tour stamps on it is from my most recent and worst Pro Tour experience. But I'm still going to keep it because like it's the only one that I kept.
It's weird. If I was talking a few episodes ago to Anthony Lee of Team Handshake, and he was telling me the coolest thing I've ever heard, which is he takes all these draft decks he does as Pro Tours and then brings them home and builds commander decks out of them. So they've all got the stamped cards, they've all got the everything. It's still the memories of the Pro Tour, but now it's in a means that he can still play instead of trying to find somebody who's got that exact draft environment to run against. And I'm like, what a genius idea. Next time I'm in a Pro Tour, I'm definitely going to do that.
That's super cool. Yeah, like one of very few stamped cards I have from way back when. My first GP day 2 was original Zendikar sealed when that GP came to Minneapolis. So I have a stamped Vampire Hexmage.
That card rules.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was it like doing commentary? Like, did you? Because I noticed you found yourself a lot in the what's the role they call it? The person who's actually just telling you what's happening in the game more than
so it's play-by-play, which is what you're referring to, and color. At the end of my career, I was doing play-by-play. I started doing color commentary, and that's when I worked with Matthias Hunt, who before they hired me, he was kind of like a switch hitter. There was a while where SCG had like way too many people on the roster. They had like 12 people rotating randomly. And Cedric was like, this isn't good. We need like defined roles. Cedric Phillips really like tightened the ship at SCG.
He is such a genius with that stuff. Like, I mean, Cedric's got a great like head for understanding how to put on an entertaining show. And so I was really glad to see, like, for instance, the most recent Pro Tour actually let him do commentary again instead of just being a random roving reporter. I'm like, you are wasting one of the great minds by making him just sit and talk to people after their matches.
Yeah, great mind behind the scenes and tremendous talent on camera as well.
Yeah.
Like a super hard combination to find. And they like whittled it down. So there was a year or 2 years where it was just Cedric, Patrick, and Matthias. And Patrick's always color, Cedric's always play-by-play, and Matthias would work with whichever one of them were on that weekend when they worked with him. And so the year that I was brought on, they brought on another team as well. They brought in 2 additional teams. Yeah, we had 3 full teams going when I first started. So I guess like I was the 4th to make it 2 teams, and they hired another team entirely. And basically they were like, all right, we're going to settle you both into one role for every weekend. And being newer to the craft, like color is a lot easier to pick up if you're like playing a lot of competitive Magic.
Right.
Where play-by-play is like a lot, like card knowledge is helpful. Being good at Magic is helpful. Cedric certainly benefits from being great at Magic, but like a lot of the skill is ad reads and, you know, knowing how to direct the conversation.
Ad reads. Tell me about the most infamous thief in the multiverse, please. Yeah, but I don't know. I think that there's an underrated skill in commentary. People always think like, oh, I could just go and I could totally talk about cards, or even just streaming, right? Like just sitting there, like I can play Magic and talk at the same time. Like you have no idea how hard that is to focus on what you're watching and then be able to relay that information to somebody. Like I had a chance to try it during a pandemic, and I was like, I can't keep up. How do you keep up? This is so hard. It's like, you have to know the matchups. You have to know the game so intently that it's just tricky, man. That's why I just really appreciate it. Like one thing about you, and especially like you and like Cedric and Peace Ollie had this talent where if I had the screen off and I was treating it like a radio broadcast, I could still follow along. That is deeply underrated because a lot of commentators who are like less skilled just leave it to the TV to say like, oh, like you can see what's happening. I don't need to tell you that he just played a land. I'm like, well,
and that was always like a big focus of Cedric's is we need, like, if somebody literally cannot see the broadcast for whatever reason, we want them to be able on some level to follow along. So you call all the action, and you got to, and when you would give notes, it would be like, you need to actually call it more specifically. Don't just say they played a tap land. All right.
Yeah.
Tell me what land they played. And like, I would try to both name a land being played and also, over as the game progressed, like highlight they have access to these colors of mana and let you know if they could not cast some spells in their deck or their hand. Like being able to like keep up with the development of the mana, I felt was very important. And like you just kind of follow that as it goes along. Like you said, playing the game a ton, having the experience, knowing what's going on in the games, the decks, and the matches is super important. But then also just being able to tune in and follow along as it happens. Yeah, it's more mentally taxing than certainly I gave it credit for before I started doing it.
Well, I mean, like for instance, you guys had to do not only like draft and like standard or whatever, but also modern and limited, modern and legacy and vintage. And obviously you're not grinding vintage matches every day. Like, so like, how would you keep up with what's going on in those forms? I mean, the decks don't change all that much, but at the same time, I don't know what happened in a Maverick versus Merfolk deck or something. Right?
So one thing about legacy players is if you ask them, they will tell you and be excited because somebody finally asked them, tell me everything you know about legacy. And they're like, I have been waiting for this. I'll buy the coffee, let's sit down for a while. They will happily tell you everything that they know. That's really what legacy is like that's always been my relationship with the legacy community is like they are so excited that somebody finally asked them about their deck.
It feels like it always felt to me like asking a D&D player to tell you about their character.
Yep, totally.
Or like a commander player to tell you about their deck, and it's like, okay, well, how much time do I have?
And it's similar to D&D too, because they don't just say like, this is what I'm playing this weekend. They'll tell you like the history of it. Well, I used to play like this because there was more blood moons in the meta, but now, and they tell you about like the entire history of any matchup you ask them about.
Well, back in 1998, when I had the deck first, I was only using 2.5 Bazaar of Baghdad because we could only afford 2.5. The third one was, I'm like, what? Half a Bazaar? Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that my background, like playing before I ever qualified for the Pro Tour, I was really interested in playing a lot of Legacy. So I have like some historic chops with that. I still like played a bit of Legacy into my first few years doing commentary. I don't know what the tipping point was. I think it was somewhere around like Dragons of Tarkir, when I stopped hating Modern and started really liking it.
Collective Company will do that to you.
Like Modern came out and some of the tournaments were so bad because like the games didn't matter. It was just like, this matchup is so lopsided. Like Eye of Ugin is like one of the most banned cards in Modern. And if you think about it, like go to Eldrazi Wintered, it's obviously it should be banned. Oh, yeah. But if you rewind to like when Modern was like new, Eye of Ugin was just like a card that they played in Red Green Tron, and they used it to find their one Emrakul, and they couldn't ever lose to Blue White Control because this card was in their deck, right? And so like the matchups was just like, why are we even playing? You would sit down and be like, all right, that's your land. We can just sign the slip. And like eventually like it got pretty playable like over time. And so I've played like a lot of modern decks. And so it's most daunting to go from 0 to covering in an old non-rotating format. Once you know Modern and you like see the schedule, or like I'm covering a Modern tournament, I don't have to learn anything new.
Well, I mean, if you were doing it these days, it would just be like, oh, okay, Orcish Bowmasters, Grief, let's go.
Oh, the One Ring. Are you familiar with this one?
The One Ring is... It is such an egregious design. Oh, God. Especially in a 40 card format. 40 life format. Why would you? Wizards. They keep designing like they have somehow managed to turn non-rotating formats into rotating formats, and I'm not sure I like this development. I think that's actually not great.
So I like that they're at least with modern anyway, still keeping their foot on the brakes when it comes to banning things.
Mm,
Like banning violent outburst meant I could play modern again. Like
yeah,
it was a combination of fury and violent outburst. There was like a stretch where like I,
Furies.
as somebody who like loves playing prowess, well, fury was legal. Is like, all right, the best red card in the format is not good in my deck, and it's good against my deck. I don't want to play your format.
Let me tell you about being an elves player
Yeah, no
in
kidding.
Fury World. It's like, oh, everybody's got a pyroclasm in every opening hand for free. Great, I love that for me. Why am I doing this? I like literally took apart my legacy and modern elves decks just because Fury exists, and there's no point. It's like that ship has sailed. Sigh. But okay, I like moving on from commentary though. Uh, I really want to talk to you about cubing because I've noticed that for years and years and years you've been writing articles about cubes. Like you are up there with like Usman, in my opinion, is one of the people who just writes like the most I've seen. There are probably other writers out there, but I definitely read like your articles, the two of you, the most in terms of like cube stuff. And like Cube is one of those things I just adore playing because like, hey, look, it's the best cards in every format, and you can just play prime time, and it's great, and everybody's happy. But you keep talking about Twobert. What in God's name is Twobert? And it's not your pet potato, so I need to know what's going on.
Yeah, so Twobert is just the name for a concept that needed a name.
Mm,
So when I refer to a Twobert, it is a 180 card cube designed to be played by 2 or 4 players.
mm,
The reason it's 180 cards is I started designing a format just for 2 players. The reason I landed on 180 cards is that is the minimum to play with 4 players by conventional card count
mm.
guidelines. You need 360 cards to play with 8 players, 180 to play with 4. And years ago, so my business partner Mike and I, we used to cube all the time. We would just like
How did you find Cube, or is it just a thing you guys did after
Cube
shows?
like exploded in like 2012ish. There's like you can't find the article. You have to like go to the Wayback Machine. This stuff is like buried. But on the mothership one day, like Cube had existed for a couple years before this, but it shows up on the mothership and it's just like introducing the cube or some mystical. I remember it like I remember Temple Garden being spoiled, where it's just like this thing that has this immediate mystique to it. You're like, I don't know what that is, but it's about to be my entire life. And it's like, this is just a stack of the best cards in the history of Magic. Like that's the early form of Cube. It was just like, we're
Yeah.
playing with all the best cards. Now Cube has evolved significantly where whatever you want to do, you can do with a cube. That's kind of like where it started. And in my PTQ days, like people just started putting cubes together as soon as they heard of it. And over time, people really started to take it and run with it. You start to see people doing stuff that was very different from just the best cards in Magic. You would run into people with a popper cube, for example. Like that was the first cube that I could build on my budget. My first cube was a popper cube because I could afford commons. I remember
Mm.
like buying the sleeves was a significant cost for me. But you started to
You
see weird
180
stuff.
sleeves, man. It's a lot.
You start to see stuff like people would build a mono blue cube. And like, if you go back to like 2010 or that kind of era, there just weren't that many green and white cards. So you had to like come up with creative solutions for that. Like I know
Mm.
someone had a cube in that era that had twice as many green cards as the other color, because if there was enough of them, you were forced to play with them.
I love that Cube is basically like a build your own set kind of idea. It's like, what are my favorite archetypes to draft? I'm just going to jam them together. Hopefully something cool will come out of it. Or like, here's a bunch of really cool cards that have random 1 and 2 card synergy somewhere in the cube, mix and match and figure it out and make it work. It's got the Wild West feeling, but it's like at the same time, it's very curated. And the way I like to play it, very powerful and very just like, I can put doofy things, or you can like this is just a mini rant, but the best like cube that Wizards ever put out by themselves was actually Iconic Masters. The Iconic Masters set is like, everybody ignored that set because it was just weird and low powered and had no EV or whatever. But if you actually draft it, it feels like a perfectly curated 7.5 power level cube, which is just like delightful to play. It's so much fun to draft. And yet, like, everybody was like, the best card in here is Azusa. Who cares? Screw this crap. Anyways, please continue. So,
yeah,
like,
backing up to the concept of a Twobert.
Yes.
So it was a while. It kind of was during our vending days. Mike and I and a number of friends, we had like a weekly group. We'd meet the cube, and we would hopefully get 8, but sometimes we got 6 or 4, and sometimes it was just he and I, or like after everyone else left, he and I would play. There's a number of ways to draft like a larger cube with 2 players, but you're kind of like just making do with what you have. Like, it's all just like extra rules to make it kind of function. And back in those days, he was like, you should design a cube specifically to be drafted with 2 players. I was like, well, that's appealing. I don't really know how you would do that. And given that like, this just works and we want 8 people anyway, I didn't really know why you would do that. Then we found ourselves in a time in history where we weren't ever going outside or seeing other people. So it became a lot more practical to actually like sit down and work on this project. I remember I had like a years old file on my Cube tutor at the time. Yeah, rest in peace, Cube tutor. And it's just like, I think I had like 50 cards on the file. I remember specifically, I was like, well, I definitely want Birds of Paradise. That's about the only thing I had figured out. Just like, how are we going to do this? But yeah, that's something I ended up working on a lot, is just like 180 cards so that you can more consistently draft decks that you want to draft and that actually function, which is not always easy with a larger cube with 2 players.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, relatedly, so 180 cards feels like such a small number, you know, like, because in a draft, you're pulling 3 packs, you're getting 45 cards out of that. So out of 45 and 45, 90, you're seeing like half of the cards of the cube, right? Like, so it seems like, how do you make this consideration? Because like building a big cube for like 8 people, you've got enough room to build out archetypes. You've got a lot of room for cards. And when you shuffle up and play, you're going to have more or less different experience roughly because of the way the cards collate and everything like that. How do you do this for 2 players to keep it so that you don't just end up falling into kind of ruts, or like decks just hand themselves to you?
I have found that when it comes to 180 card environments, you have to have one driving principle for inclusion of every card. Like when you talk about different archetypes, when you have 540 cards, there's a lot you can do. You can put in 1 copy of opposition. Now there's an opposition deck, you know, like it's just like that easy. But in 180 cards, when you see it all the time, that's not very fun or interesting.
Yeah.
So everything kind of is just like on the same wavelength, and that's actually where it becomes more engaging. Just draft to draft is everything kind of works with everything. You really have to design with a heavy hand in that regard. And to really highlight how heavy my hand was on my first design, I actually sat down and with 180 cards, you want 30 mana fixing lands, and there's exactly 23 cards of every mono color, which if you play a lot of retail limited, you know that plus 17 lands is a deck. That's a 40 card deck. So it's just all right, if we just sat down, I could take all the green cards, you could take all the black cards, we can play. And as long as that deck is coherent and functions, then you just start looking at the colors, all right, well, how does this color overlap with this color? And then just very basic, red plus blue or whatever starts to become different archetypes just naturally, as long as all the colors function as their own deck.
That's a kind of a challenging idea of having to build a deck that is a reasonable monocolor deck that doesn't have blue cares about artifacts or blue cares about spells, and trying to run them together. You have to be able to play this column of blue cards as a deck and be able to be cohesive about it. But then at the same time, making it so you've got 10 different color pairs that have reasonable play to them is, man, and out of 23 cards a color, that's a lot of.
You can see why I sat on it for a few years before I.
You have to pick those 23 cards very, very specifically. Yeah. That seems really. Cube design is already very challenging, because tier 1 of cube design, it's I'm going to take 10 archetypes that I like and just sprinkle the colors, and not even that, I'm just going to take 500 cards that I like and put them in, and then you start sorting and shifting and making decks. But like, because I've tried to design a cube lately. I've just been sitting around thinking about it. And what I'm noticing, the hardest thing, and this is a question I have for you, is the interconnection between colors is incredibly difficult and challenging. We were like just talking about, like, how do you take a deck that's in a color or two colors and yet make it so that when the person is drafting it who doesn't know that you want them to play this deck is just taking cards of these different colors? How do you build links that make them cohesive?
So I think you can definitely follow just some of the wisdom of Wizards of the Coast. And I know that, like, in a lot of my work, it's just like I listen to Mark Rosewater's podcast and read
Yeah.
his articles. He gives away so much stuff for free.
It,
And
it's a literal college tier course in game design.
mhm.
It's
And like Magic design has come so far from the days when you started playing. Were you like in like the Gamma play test? You said you've been playing a long time.
yeah, I started with photocopies in a shoebox. Uh, I started with the dark, so
Okay, right on.
it's like it's weird because I can remember. I guess the dark and revised, so somewhere between the two of them is when I started. Because like when I was just getting started, you could still buy like starter decks or revised were the thing on the shelf.
Okay.
So lots of sea serpents.
But to your question about like harmony between two colors, a
Yes,
big thing you see in every retail limited set these days: signpost uncommons,
yeah,
two color gold signpost uncommons. They tell you what the deck is supposed to do. And I think that like when it comes to curating the gold column in my cubes, I tend to have like 3 to 5 cards of every two color pair. And they either like really force your hand on what your deck is trying to do once you draft them.
yeah,
Or the other thing I like to do is similar to like that 23 card Twobert monocolored deck is I want all the gold cards in a color pair to play well in the same deck, which is a much easier ask than having the entire column of one color. But like I
What do
want
you
all
mean
the
play well
Demir
in the same
cards.
deck?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
you mean
like
like all the Demir cards, not just like every gold card in the deck.
not every gold card. Yeah. We're not trying to build 5-color Niv Mizzet with all of our cubes. But like every Demir card should have some harmony.
Mm.
And it can be closer or further. For example, like Baleful Strix plus that stupid ninja. What's the Mistblade? No, that's something Shinobi. Is it
The
Mistblade
Yeah,
Shinobi?
it's something Shinobi.
Fallen
Fallen,
Shinobi.
Fallen Shinobi. That card
Baleful Strix
rules.
and Fallen Shinobi. That's kind of like you would put those cards in the same deck every
Oh,
time.
that makes me unhappy to think about. Hitting someone with a Baleful Strix and then bringing in a Fallen Shinobi and then replaying Baleful.
Well, you got to
I'm
think
not
about
sure I
the
like
person doing it. You know, you don't want that to happen to you.
yeah. Yeah, like I've got commander brain, so every time I think of a card, I'm like, oh, these two cards wouldn't go in the same deck. They don't have like, typal synergy or any kind of like connection. But in a cube, I'd be like, oh my god, I'm slamming the hell out of it.
And that also like doesn't feel obvious, right? Like there's still a little bit of discovery going on there, which I think is kind of what you're alluding to when you talk about like wanting different archetypes and
Yeah,
space to explore as a player. Like you're not just like, all right, I need to get the Baleful Strix Fallen Shinobi deck. It's just like, oh, these cards are both sick, and then you play them together. Like, whoa, I'm really doing it.
right. So like, I guess that relates to like a two-player experience of a game. I tend to think of more of board game feeling than of like Magic, kind of just the way we run into each other. And if you're playing with a two-player cube and you're playing with the same people over and over again, how do you ensure that there's enough replayability?
I think that it becomes way more important to isolate individually powerful cards, like cards that seem to show up and win every time.
Mm,
A good example of this, I recently rented a cabin up north with some friends, and it was like a cube getaway board game getaway weekend.
that sounds awesome.
It was super fun. Definitely recommend it if you ever have the time and money for that kind of thing. But we played a good amount of like my original Twobert design, and one of the cards I had added, and I haven't played a ton of that cube since adding it, was the completed Nissa Ascended Animist.
Mm.
And I noticed over that weekend that every time that card was cast, the person casting it won the game.
Oh, that's annoying.
Yeah, and it's just like you can still have powerful cards where that's not true, but once you notice, like, okay, somebody's seeing this card, they're moving in on green, they're not having a hard time closing once that happens, you really got to proactively get those cards out of your environment. So I was just
Mm.
like, as soon as I had I added Gold Vein Hydra from the new set
Oh,
in
that
that
card is
slot,
so cool.
which seems super rad. And I don't think that someone's going to jam that and just win every time because they have it.
No, but it's definitely like Gold Vein Hydra is a card that I think is simultaneously really stupid and also absolutely delightful. Like I put it in my Minsk and Boo +1/+1 counters deck where it is really, really actually absurd. It is kind of the dumbest thing you can do and just get you I don't know. I love that kind. I mean, I'm a Timmy. I want to
Yeah.
play big, stupid things that blow up into a lot of things. So
Yeah, and it's like a cool card because like you have a lot of mana is just like awesome. And if
yeah,
you're kind of stuck on lands, then it's just this creature that your opponent doesn't want to get into combat in
right.
because then you just get the treasures. So
Exactly.
it's like a lot to like there. And you just kind of like look out for cards that are winning too much and find cards like that are like cool and flexible and just churn in that direction.
Do you still make like normal type cubes, like bigger ones, or do you kind of focus on these smaller environments?
I mostly focus on the small environments. I do have two 360 card cubes together. One of them is just a 360 card vintage cube. You could say nothing fancy. You could say everything fancy. I don't know how you want to phrase that. Like it does. There's nothing fancy. It's just a Black Lotus powered environment.
Yeah, people get a little jaded about vintage cube, but then and everyone's like, "Oh man, there's too many vintage cubes on Mitgo or playing it." But then when you sit down and play a paper vintage cube, and you crack open a pack, and there's like two Moxas staring at you, it is the coolest damn feeling. I love it. I love vintage cube. I realize it's cliche to love vintage cube, but there's something about going like, you know, Taiga like Mox Emerald channel is just like, yeah, let's go.
It's one of those things. It's popular because it's good.
Yeah,
I don't know. What do you want from me?
look, that's why I love Cube. It's like the place where you can play cards that you literally can't play anywhere. Like you can put in garbage from like you can put in conspiracies, you can put in like the cool open another pack and draft a card out of that one from the onsets. Like I love the fact that Cube it's weird to say this, but Cube feels almost more casual than Commander does. You know, like Cube feels like the apotheosis of kitchen table magic. Like here's all the cards I like in a pile.
Only one person has to bring the pile too.
Right? It's awesome. It's so cool. And that's why I'm just I love things that that incentivize me to use cards that I wouldn't use other places. And I realize Vintage Cube is not exactly that because you're obviously going to be using the top tier cards. But like I want to build a very common type of just like cool garbage draft archetypes that were awesome to play but had no value in any other environment but draft. And like, bring them back together and be like, look, this was super fun draft environment. You're never going to see these cards in a commander deck because they're just not going to make the cut, or Pauper even, or whatever. But here,
build your own iconic masters.
Exactly.
Shivam masters.
I think that would be a horrific idea. But I'm going to do it anyway, just because I want to play Mahamoti Jin. Like let me have a cube where Mahamoti Jin is a good card to pick and feels great.
Yeah.
It's not too much to ask.
If you can dream it, you can do it.
Look,
that's the beauty of Cube.
Yeah, right. Like I've been playing a lot of Chandelar lately. Chandelar is basically, in my opinion, peak magic. Because you sit there and you're like, look, I've got 3 Lotuses and 4 Time Twisters, and I'm using them to churn out Sedge Troll. It's like, this is you can have all the greatest mana in the world, but the power is going to be capped by the garbage ass creatures. And that's what I want out of Cube. I'm going to make a powered cube where the best creature you can play is Force of Nature. And you're going to be like, what am I doing?
Well, I'll tell you what you're doing. You're paying green
every turn. Every turn. Or you take 8 damage. I put a Spirit Link on it. It's amazing. You haven't lived until you've Spirit Linked your own like Lord of the Pit or Force of Nature and just be like, I ain't paying upkeep. Hit me, buddy. Yeah.
That makes me think of like one of the first Magic cards that was like in my play group. I think that like I bought one for $20 before it was reprinted, but it's the card Sarah Avatar. Like, if power and toughness is equal to your life total. Are you kidding me? That's so big. How could anybody possibly beat that?
Oh my god, dude! You're just gonna sit there and like, my fireball doesn't go that high. What do I do? So what's it like running a store these days?
I mean, things are busy again.
Yeah, you must have been rough for like a couple of years there.
Oh, no kidding. I mean, like there was a stretch where we were only doing curbside anything, obviously no events.
Yeah.
Now F&M is back in a big way. Competitive Magic's coming back. The standard push has been more successful in some spots than others. Like we're in Pioneer RCQ season, so we're doing Pioneer and Modern F&M. So like standard is kind of like on the back burner there, which is like weird coming off of a standard pro tour.
Yeah. But standard right now looks so much fun. It
Yeah,
looks
it
so
seems sick.
cool.
You got to get people playing it consistently, and like once you do that, I think a longer rotation helps people like stay invested. I mean, I was talking to my brother about it. It's just like, yeah, like no new cards domain just won the pro tour, and like I don't even know how to. Like, it might have played some new cards, but it didn't look new to me as I was like drifting in and out of sleep watching the pro tour coverage. But yeah, like pre-release has been huge. Like we were sold out of every event for Outlaws pre-release. Yeehaw!
Nice.
It's crazy. But yeah, the sets are good. Like Lord of the Rings was great. I actually was really surprised at the success of Ravnica Remastered. I was wary because of like Commander Masters being like one of the worst sets of all time.
In what sense? To draft or to?
So like Commander players don't want to draft their Commander decks. They want to play their Commander decks.
They're wrong. They're so
Yeah, I
wrong.
mean, like it's like a novel and cool experience, but it's not one that has been sold to many Commander players. And
you know what? I like Baldur's Gate taught me that drafting your own Commander deck is insanely fun.
Yeah, I have a friend that has like a ridiculously large Commander cube. Like I think at one point it was 2,000 or 3,000 cards, and like
Jesus Christ,
a Commander cube is outrageous. You can
like
have
you're
so
dragging
much
a wagon behind you.
Yeah, he would. He just takes like one long box, like an 800 card box, and takes some of the cards with him. He calls it a slug. We'll draft a slug at the Commander cube.
But yeah, like so. Actually, I guess I have a professional question to ask, a professional interest as a member of the CAG. What have you seen in the decade or so that you've been like, having brick and mortar kind of like going? Commander has changed a lot, and Commander is like really shot in popularity a lot. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what that's been like from your perspective as like a shopkeep?
I think the big thing that stands out is that people learn how to play Magic playing Commander now.
Isn't that weird?
It's outrageous to think about. Like I was playing Commander when it was new, when it was Elder Dragon Highlander, and like we were picking our favorite planar Chaos Dragon,
right?
And building a deck, and like there was maybe 2 options in some of the color pairs. I had a Janara Bant deck because you really didn't have anything else you could play.
Janara was my first ever Commander deck, so I'm nice. With
you. And like it was only people super experienced. Generally, people playing Commander owned revised dual lands,
right,
and knew a bunch of weird and obscure cards. And now, like somebody plays for the first time, they pick up a Commander precon. It's like it's time to learn Magic. And the way that I understand the shift in perspective is just like, once you have a deck that's ready to go, once you can just buy a precon, it's kind of just like learning a board game.
Right.
And like that's the length of a Commander game. It's just kind of like a medium. I mean, Magic's a heavy game when you talk about board games. You actually know what's going on. But like when we're talking about board gamers that aren't playing for stakes, there's like not that much imperative to really know what's going on. You just have to like take actions and play the game.
Right.
And maybe next time you'll know it better. And if you want to keep playing it, you learn it a little bit better every time. And learning Magic used to be a lot more like, here's an inscrutable rule book. Right. Go watch hundreds of hours of coverage, and like it changed a lot in the times, certainly that you've been playing and that I've been playing, where like you learn a constructed deck now. It's really easy to find like a primer or a sideboard guide, many hours of somebody playing it. When I first started PTQing, you brought your own damn deck. Like you had to build a deck, you figure out what you're doing. Good luck.
You know what's funny? The other day, my son's like, "Papa, I want to play Magic with you." I'm like, "Great." And he's like, "Do you have any decks that are not Commander decks?" I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Can we play a 60 card deck?" Because like I had the Lord of the Rings starter set that came out. They sent me a kit of that, and it's super fun to play if you're teaching somebody how to play. And he's like, "I don't want to play with like just the 100 cards. I want to play with I'm like, oh my god, the tides have completely turned. Like, it's like my son is begging me to play 60 card kitchen table Magic instead of like grinding freaking commander games. It's so funny.
And I think that just like the Commander precon and just like having Magic be accessible as a board game experience, and like you might say, well, they've always done pre-constructed decks, and it's like it wasn't the same. It
No,
was not remotely the same.
I mean, I do miss dual decks though, because like that's how I taught my wife how to play, and that's like I like the thematic kind of balance and whatever. But here's the thing, right? Like Commander precons are selling hand over fist. Dual decks were not.
No.
Like I was the one buying dual decks, nobody else was. Um, it's it seems just like when you think about it though, it's like Magic is so complex, and picking up a commander deck and just being like, well, the thing about precon is that all the cards in it you can roughly expect will work together, especially now that we're not doing like 2011 style precons where it's just colors and cards in this color that needed a reprint. But now that these are all thematic and like work in a synergistic way, yeah, I could give somebody who's never played Magic a precon and they can figure it out. It's weird when you get into like playing against non-precon decks though, where people are using all of a sudden just bizarre nonsense from 20 years of Magic or whatever. But I guess people are dealing with it because Commander's huge. Like, have you noticed like many player? Like, what is the player base like at your store?
Very diverse, like long range of experience with the game as well. When you come in on Sunday, that's like our big open play Commander day. You can't find the table. You got to come early and stick around if you want to be playing Commander. And I think that something you were kind of touching on there was like seeing some new 100-word card for the first time and be like, how do I get into this? And I think something that you got to try to remember, it's hard, especially like in this era where all the enfranchised players are like, why is it always preview season? I don't know what all these cards do. And just like imagine, like try to remember the magic of seeing a new card for the first time and being like, whoa,
what does that even do?
What can I do with this? That's cool. Like casual players think it's cool when they see a new card. Like I love preview seasons. I'm like, how can I put this in my cube? And like
exactly.
A lot of like enfranchised competitive players are like, people are gonna play this against me in Legacy now. And it's just like some people are trying to have fun. Okay.
Look, Initiative and Monarch are great when you're playing multiplayer. I'm sorry that it doesn't work in your one-on-ones. Like that's somebody else's problem. But I think like it's interesting because the past 2-3 sets or so, I have started kind of like, because I'm not in the ambassador program anymore, I don't get like every card and I don't have like an imperative to learn them anymore. So I've kind of been just more lax about following previews and stuff. And now it's just like I'm sitting on playing a game and somebody pops down a card and I'm like, what in the hell is that? Where did that come from? What like, and they're like, oh yeah, this was in the precon for blah, blah. I'm like, whoa, that's insane. I need to like remember that card. And like half of it is fatigue, but the other half of it is definitely exactly that nostalgic factor of when I first discovered Commander and you're like digging through bulk bins and you're like, this one Nemesis rare that's complete garbage anywhere is the exact card that I need right now. Like when I discovered overlaid terrain for my Titanium deck, you're like, this card trash, except in my deck where I want to sacrifice all my lands and get a bunch of 5/3s. It's amazing.
I think something that really helps me remember that is perspective. I was really lucky to be there, but in 2019, the end of 2019 in Richmond, it was the first mystery booster event. Yeah, and I signed up for it because I was like, I don't know what that is, but hey, I'm here. And we found out like nobody knew what was going to be in there. So like just it being a 1,000 plus card set was wild enough. Right. And nobody had any idea that the play test cards were going to be there. Like that concept was new. And for the first time in 15 years at that point, I opened up a Magic pack and I was like, I had no idea that anything like this could be inside of a Magic pack.
It's so cool.
And I just like felt that joy of a new player as a very enfranchised old player. And it was so delightful. And something I do during preview season, I think that like, people might have mixed feelings about this as somebody who like generally is expected to like read cards or like creating content or whatever, but I have empowered myself not to read every card. I start reading a card and I say, I don't like that. I stop reading it. And I think that like, if you have your feed and it's like, oh, here's another new card. If you feel like you should read it, of course it's going to be burdensome. But if
Yeah.
you just keep tapping the scroll wheel, it's not a problem.
Well, I mean, like, I will briefly for instance, Outlaws of Thunder Junction is such a good example of this because there's for some reason 1,200 cards in that set, and I'm just like, there's no way, conceivable way for me to know every card in here, and there's no reason for me to know every card in here. So now I'm just gonna like ambiently scroll by, and if I play a card or if I run into it in limited or whatever, I'm like, wow, that's neat. I've never seen that before. What does it do? Oh, it beats me. Okay, cool. And then it just like, take a note. I'm treating it like I did Magic in the old days. Somebody uses a cool card, I make a note of it, and then I put it into a deck that I think would be neat with it later. And that's so freeing. It's
Mhm.
like, especially for somebody like you and I are very deeply, deeply enfranchised players. And we, to some extent, part of our income and stuff just relies on knowing this stuff and being able to just let that burden go and just be like, I can just enjoy this and still, participate as a member of the community or whatever, but without needing to have an insider. Like, I don't need to be LSV looking at a draft at the Pro Tour tier level of knowledge of a card. I can just
Mhm.
appreciate that it's there and either take it or not.
Yeah, I generally try to play a little retail limited of every new set, and if I like it, I play it a lot more.
I
There's
play a
been a
lot of
few.
sealed.
Yeah, I play more sealed. Sealed on Arena is so easy to
It's
just like
so
jump in
easy.
and do a bunch. But when I was looking at the preview for Murders at Karloff Manor, I was like, I am so annoyed reading every common that I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do my usual sealed or draft, and just allowing yourself to be like, I don't need to do this. I'm this whole other person that exists even when I'm not playing Magic. You don't have to shove yourself into the miserable part of the pool.
But that is such a hard lesson for people to learn, right? Like, it took me a long time to be able to sit there and say, I can read a book instead.
Yeah.
It's like I can go and play some video games. I can do literally anything. And like Magic is still going to be here. There's going to be another set. There's going to be 3,000 more cards. My commander deck's going to matter. And yes, like I pay attention because I have to, because part of the, commander advisory group and this, and that, the other thing. That's fine though. Like if somebody
Mhm.
says like, hey, my crinkle deck needs to have 3 more green cards. Do you have any suggestions? I can look it up and then quickly Google and use my years of intellect to figure it out rather than needing to inherently know what crinkle does.
Right.
Uh,
I think there's like this perspective about falling behind.
yeah,
I need to keep up on preview season, otherwise I'm behind. And
right. I'm
this
like
concept
behind
of
what?
behind only exists if there's like a place you're supposed to be, right? Like Magic's a fun game. You're supposed to be wherever you're having fun with it.
Right.
And like, I don't know, if you really care about competitive, just go win the Pro Tour with no new cards domain. It happens. You know?
Man, that I think that's exactly it. It's like a lot of people are like, "Oh man, I don't want to fall behind. I need to keep up with the meta." And I'm like, "Dude, this is casual, man. We don't have a meta. The meta is you and whatever your buddies are bringing, right? Like, just chill. It's fine." And if you don't like, I have decks that I haven't updated since 2014. They still work just fine. All the cards are still legal. It's fine.
Mhm.
And periodically, I'll swap a card out. Whatever. It doesn't matter. There's You don't need to keep up. You can just enjoy and
I
just play
think
the cards you like.
competitive players get too hung up on
Oh
meta
yeah.
games too. Or like,
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know if this deck is good in the meta game, and it's just like, I don't know. What are your other hobbies? Like, I personally enjoy disc golfing. All right, I'm not looking up the new technology for how to make plastic discs. I go outside and I get a smell of fresh air, and it's delightful. Shuffling up my constructed deck and finding out what happened because I haven't played Modern in 2 years. It's fun exploration. It's
Yeah,
like, remember what you enjoy about the thing that you purport to enjoy.
that is the key. Remembering that this is fun. Like, and we're here because we enjoy this and we like each other. And it's just like if you invest yourself too much into this, like the action of cards and keeping up and stuff, you're gonna lose sight of any enjoyment. And then it's not a hobby anymore.
Hmm.
Now it's just like drudgery. But anyways, dude, this has been a lovely conversation. I'm so glad I finally got to talk to you. I've been a huge fan of yours for years and years. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. This has been delightful, and you're definitely one of like the standouts for most visible, most positive members of the Magic community writ large. So it's really delightful for me to be joining you today.
That's very kind of you to say. If folks wanted to find you or your articles or whatever, where could they go?
You can find me on Twitter at Ryan Overdrive, and my articles go up weekly on StarCityGames.com. I write about any and everything Cube. I don't know, like you said, I have years of backlog at this point. And I would encourage you, if you have like something you're wondering about, to just like at me on Twitter. Hey, I want to know about this. If your question is like specific and good, I'll usually do one of two things. I either have already written about it and I can tell you what I wrote about. I can send you to the article, or maybe you'll like inspire me to write something new, because there's always more space to explore.
I think we're about due for a new, hey, how to build a cube primer.
You got to refresh that stuff. I mean, like there's a lot of job security in Magic content.
There's always new players, man. But anyways, my friends, you can find me at Gearporty Gears. You can find me this podcast anywhere podcasts are sold, or at YouTube every Tuesday. Thanks to my editor Dan, and also you can see me on Shivam and Wheeler Love Magic, where me and Wheeler basically go back through every single set in the history of the game and just start talking about every card we think is cool, because there's not enough positivity in Magic, honestly. And you can also hear me on the Chronicles of Dragonlance podcast, where I talk about Dragonlance with my buddy John, because nobody else is going to do it, and I feel like it. But with that, remember, it's not Magic without the gathering, and we'll see you next time.